Okay, so yeah, so this is the copy constructor that you need to create. So which will copy the schedule for of a blue into PI schedule. So this is you have to think about what you should do, what code you should have in the copy constructor. So let me give you a hint that there's no need to actually keep the file names as members, um, but since when you have this function, for instance, so you're taking the file names separately, explicitly. So you don't need to have those as members. Anyways, even if you have, it doesn't really matter. But ideally, it shouldn't be, uh, since we are taking these as arguments. All right. So, all right. So you might have guessed that you have to create a copy constructor. Similarly, this line would call the default constructor. And here we are. The airblue schedule object is created using a parameterized constructor having three parameters: the durations file for airblue, the cities file for airblue, and the output file name, which is result.txt. So, and so what else we had? If you recall, in the fly driver, we have these two functions, which were the first functions that you might have implemented. The read durations and read cities. We don't have any such function over here. So, okay. So, we don't have any of these two functions over here, obviously, but we need to load the durations and load cities. We used to do that in the assignment one using these two function calls, but we don't have these two functions calls in our driver file as a public function. So basically, you are using a constructor. So that the code that we used to write in these two functions should be implemented in the constructor. But in fact, that might not be a very good way because you'll be having a very large function. So instead, keep this function as it is. Keep the functionality of the code of these two functions as it is. You can copy it over here in the class. What you can do is that you can call these two functions inside the constructor. Just like in the lab example, we used to call the make matrix function in the default constructor. So similarly, you can call the read durations and read cities function inside the constructor. All right, and you have to make a few changes. For example, we don't have rows and columns over here. We use this because this was being passed by reference, so that this is modified in the main file. But now we don't have rows and columns in our main driver file. So those rows and columns will basically be one of the will be the members of our class. I'm not telling you any more. You guys have to figure out yourself what else would be the members. This is part of assignment. If you have any problems or any questions, you should feel free to ask and drop by in the office hours and get a candy also. So this is it, I guess. These you must have noticed this that you have the same functions. For example, find nearest city from source. So you have to just you might comparing these two different functions might also help you. For example, note that now we only have now in OOP, since we are using OOP, we now only have one argument for this which is passed to this function. Otherwise, we used to have one, two, three, four, five, six, 7 arguments. So what about the rest of the 6 arguments? Think and then decide it yourself. So this is part of the assignment. I'm not going to tell you more about this. Similarly, you should compare this function. This had an extra argument x. So compare it with this and figure out yourself what should be the data part of your class flight schedule. I guess that's the rest of the assignment is self-explanatory. This is something new. For example, over here we have the default constructor. You might not need to do anything in this. Just it's as a GPP, you might initialize all the data. For example, you might be having some pointers. So you might like to initialize the pointers with a null value. And similarly, you might want to initialize the values of rows and columns to, for example, zeros. So you can do that in the default constructor. Not anything meaningful would be done in the default constructor because we don't know the schedule. We don't know the file yet. So for the case of default constructor in the Shaheen schedule case, we are calling the load from file function explicitly, which will set the durations file and the cities file. Similarly, if you're really smart enough, and you should be thinking smartly, so you might, if you define this function smartly, you might call the same function in this parameters constructor maybe. So think about this as well. Similarly, since the output file is still not stated with this in this load file function, because the load file function has a purpose of only loading the data. It does not have need to set the output file as well. So that's why the output file is being set by a separate setter, which is also called a mutator. And you have discussed this in the lab. So that's it, I guess. The rest is the same. Each function will output the respective city or cities in the results file, which is over here. We can change the name of this file um, in the driver file. Anyways, so start with a simple case. Like for example, in order to start, you might simply start with this Shaheen. You might start with the blue schedule. For example, forget this. Start designing or start implementing a code and test with this driver file and so on. So, and then move forward. You may even go ahead and start with this even. Start one by one and go incrementally, step by step, and solve this problem. So if you have any issues, please do drop me an email or Google Hangout me or drop by in my office hours as soon as possible. I won't be available in my office on. All right, I'll make that that announcement offline because this might not be related to this topic. So see you guys later and best of luck. Bye bye. Regarding the submission, you only need to submit the flight schedule.cpp class and flight schedule.h class. You need to only submit these two files. Note this down clearly. I won't announce this explicitly. Best of luck. Goodbye.